everyone! For today's video I want to do something a little bit different, and this is an idea that I feel like I've had in my head for such a long time, but I haven't wanted to film it because I just knew how hard this was going to be, and let me tell you,
this was terrible.
So basically what I'm going to be doing in today's video is I'm going to be showing you the 10 palettes that I could keep if I could only keep 10. And the way I'm going to look at this is kind of more from a if I wasn't a YouTuber kind of view, because obviously if I could only keep 10 palettes I would want it to be a very curated and a collection that I feel like I have everything I need in. So this doesn't really necessarily have to be my 10 favorite palettes in my collection, and honestly these aren't my favorite 10 palettes in my collection, but these are the 10 palettes that I feel like would make my collection the most complete. Some of these are even palettes that maybe have a little bit of an emotional value to me, and I guess I will start with those because I feel like I'm not really usually one who gets emotionally attached to materialistic things, but for some reason these two palettes just have like a special place in my heart, so I'm just gonna go ahead and start with these. So the first one is actually going to be the Dragon Child palette by Jeffree Cosmetics, former Makeup Monsters when they came out with this palette. This is what the palette looks like. Now, is this a palette that I would absolutely need in my 10 palettes? No, I don't think so. Yeah, there's some like very unique shades in here that I don't really have in other palettes, like this teal and this blue and the green. Like all of these, like the four colors here, like kind of in the corner, absolutely beautiful. I don't really think I have a dupe for really any of these in the other palettes that I'll be showing you, but the reason why this palette is just so special to me is because it's kind of what started my journey on YouTube, and it was like the first palette that I ever reviewed, and I don't know, I felt like so at home. Like I just felt like this is where I was meant to be. I don't know, it's hard to explain, but this palette is just special to me, and also I love Menagerie so much. Like they're my favorite brand, and there's something about this palette to me that just, there's no way I could ever get rid of this, especially now that it's discontinued. Like if I had to burn all of the rest of my palettes in my collection, there's no way that I could get rid of this. Like I just couldn't. Like even if that means that I would have gaps in my collection, if I kept this palette, I would still keep this palette. So that's why this palette is in the pile of palettes that I want to keep. And also keep in mind, I'm doing this pretending like I don't own any single shadows. So I'm just seeing this from like, if I could only have 10 eyeshadow palettes as like all of my eyeshadows, these are the ones that I would keep. So next up, let's go to the other palette that I feel like is extremely special to me. This is the Laminate Sandra Rose palette. And if you haven't already seen this palette, the reason why this palette is so special to me is because the owner actually contacted me and she asked me for my input on this palette. It wasn't even supposed to be like a big thing or anything. She just kind of sent me a picture while she was working on this and was like, hey, what do you think? And then we started talking, and we ended up sending like, you know, Photoshop pictures back and forth, and like really talking about the color story in this palette and really working together to like come up with this. And I love this palette for that reason. Like this is special to me, even though it wasn't like a collab or anything. It was just like a friendly gesture. We just kind of wanted to, you know, just sit down and talk about eyeshadows, and that's what we did. And also on top of that, like the shadows in this palette are absolutely incredible. I think there should be a couple of these left in stock. I will have all of these palettes, the ones that are available, listed down in my description box. I also have a code with Laminatrix that's not affiliated, so I think it's just Annette, but I'll put it up on the screen if you want to go check it out. But I would highly recommend Laminatrix as a brand. They're an Australian-based brand. They're absolutely awesome. I love their shadows so much. So let's move into the palettes that I feel like are more like necessities, like palettes that I feel like I need to have in my collection in order to feel like my collection is complete. So the first thing that I thought of that I needed was a rainbow palette, and I don't have a lot of rainbow palettes in my collection because I prefer more curated and more unique color stories. So when I see a rainbow palette, it doesn't really excite me unless there's like something else to it and not just a rainbow palette. But the one rainbow palette that I do have is the Jawbreaker Palette by Jeffree Star, and I didn't really think that I would end up putting any of my Jeffree Star palettes like in this pile because Jeffree Star doesn't have my favorite formula. But this just goes to show that I didn't think of this in terms of like the palettes that I like the most, but the palettes that I felt like I would need. So this is what the palette looks like. I'm sure you have all seen this, but the reason why I had to pick this is because it basically has all of the primary mattes. I have a yellow, I have a red, I have a blue, I have a green. You know, like I have all of the basics covered with this palette. And I also have some very, not necessarily like super unique, but some kind of unique shimmers as well. Like I have this yellow shimmer right here, which there's not like a yellow shimmer in a lot of palettes. And also I have the pink shimmer, which is great, as well as a red shimmer and an orange shimmer. And those are colors I feel like you don't see in a lot of palettes. So this was like the first palette that I honestly reached for when I knew I was going to film this video, because I knew I needed to have something like this in my collection. And the next palette was also something that I felt like I would need in order to kind of fill the gap with these kind of shadows. And this is the, wow, I just dug my finger into one of the shadows in this palette. This is the Creepy Cute palette by Shroud Cosmetics. They have now rebranded and they're called Shroud Cosmetics. I'm still waiting for their Arcana, is that what it's called? Arcana palette to be shipped. I did pre-order that like a very long time ago and I'm really excited, but this palette is beautiful. And this is like an all pastel palette with a gray and a black. And I mean, this is very, very unique to my collection, and I felt like I would be able to use this palette along with all of these other palettes and it would just work wonderfully together. And this is like the difference between how I would do my makeup not having a YouTube channel and how I do my makeup having a YouTube channel, because having a channel, I sometimes feel like I'm very restricted that I have to only keep it to one palette. But if I don't film for some reason, I don't film my looks, I always use more than one palette. So this is the kind of palette that I will reach for a lot more when I know I can use it, you know, in conjunction with something else, because this just goes really well with a lot of the things that I have in my collection. And actually the same thing can be said for the next palette. And this is a palette that I'm not keeping this because it's expensive, but I'm keeping this because it's the kind of palette that I know I dip into when I'm not filming. And this is the Pat McGrath. I think this is called the no, what is this even called? I'll have the name up on the screen. I tried to look at the carton, but it doesn't say. It's not even a carton. I don't even know what this is called, but this is what the palette looks like. This is the all shimmer palette from Pat McGrath. It's the only palette that I have from her. These shimmers are amazing, and also given that it has a silver and a gold, that's like the main reason why I was like, I know I need to have this in my collection, because none of my other palettes here really has a silver and a gold in it, and I don't have a silver in a lot of my palettes. So this is like almost a palette that I keep only because of the silver, but also because of all of these other shades are just beautiful, even though they're not something I reach for on a daily basis. But this red shimmer right here, I mean, it's just, oh, it's stunning. Like, I love this palette. I wish I could use it more, but it's just one of those palettes that now I feel like it's more of a collector's item for me, but it's also a palette that I really, really enjoy when I do use it. So I felt like it had a place in my 10 palette collection, if that makes sense. And I know I forgot to say this in the beginning of the video, but I do want to make this a tag video because I want to see other people struggle with this, because this was hard. And I also want to see just like how other people think about their collection if they were to only keep 10 palettes, and like how, I don't know, because for me it's like if I could only keep 10 palettes I probably wouldn't be on YouTube, you know? So like I have to see it from like if I wasn't on YouTube kind of standpoint. And I'm very curious to see like how other people would approach the same situation and just like see where they would end up, because I know that a lot of these palettes, like I said, aren't my favorite palettes, but I feel like a lot of them just needed to be in my collection. So the next palette is definitely one that I feel like I wouldn't say is even in my top 20 palettes in my collection. And this is the Sugar Crystals palette by Voss. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely love this palette. I think this palette is great, but it obviously is a rainbow palette. So for that reason, it's not something that I reach for like on a daily basis, because I like palettes that have more depth to it. But as a palette that will go along with other palettes, this is wonderful. And like one of the main reasons I wanted this palette to be in my 10 palette collection is because of this bottom row right here, because I don't have a lot of very light shimmers in a lot of the other palettes, and I need my inner corner highlights, and I love having a very light, colorful inner corner highlight, and these shadows right here are just perfect for that. So that's like the main reason why I wanted to keep this palette in my 10 palette collection, because I knew I would get a lot of use out of this, and it would just be a very helpful palette to have. So this was really a no-brainer. It was also one of the first palettes that I pulled out. Now the next palette is a palette that I felt like I wanted to keep because of its versatility and because of just how well it performs and how easy it is to work, even though it's not a palette that I'll be using all of the shadows in all the time. But this is Dee Natasha the Nona Metropolis palette. I've done so many videos with this. I'll have those videos linked up at the corner. They somehow haven't gotten a lot of views, and I was surprised by that because I thought this was going to be like a pretty hyped up product. But this is what the palette looks like, and looking at it, you're probably going to be like, that's very neutral. There's a lot of very similar shades in this palette, but once you start playing with it and you start putting it on your eyes, like you'll realize that the undertones of a lot of these shadows are like very unique and very different, and they're so easy to work with. The only thing that I will say with this palette is that if you don't have the right kind of brushes, it might be a little bit tricky, because I find that I need to use very, very dense but still fluffy brushes in order to be able to really make this work, and I have a lot of those, so it's not really a problem for me. But I don't think that a lot of people who are used to using like very big crease brushes and like fluffy brushes are going to have the best time with some of these cream to powder mattes, because they don't pick up very well on like a very fluffy brush, so you need something a little bit denser also to really like buff it into your skin. I find that that just works the best. But I had such a good time with this palette. This is the palette that I feel like I dip into when I'm not filming for some reason, which is probably like 3 out of 50 times, but you know what I mean? Like, just the fact that I reach for this palette when I'm not filming, I feel like that says a lot, because this palette just goes so well with a lot of the other things in my collection. And last time I used this along with my Kaleidos palettes, and it just turned out beautifully, and I love the look that I did with those. And you'll probably be surprised by the fact that I don't have any of my Kaleidos palettes in my 10 palettes here, because I didn't want to waste a 6-pan palette space when I could have picked something that had more colors in it. So none of my very small palettes really made it into my group here, which I'm kind of surprised by, because there are some shades in those palettes that I absolutely love, and I tried so many times. I was sitting on the floor just like looking at all of my palettes, and I'm like, I want to pick you because I love you, but then I looked at all of my other ones and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna get way more use out of this one if that's all I can keep than I would with my Kaleidos palette. So none of them made it into my collection, which I was shocked by, because I really thought I would end up using one of them. So next up is a palette that I really like, but it's not one of my favorite palettes in my collection. But the reason why this palette made it, this is by the way the Magic Mini palette by Juvia's Place, and the reason why I felt like I needed to keep this palette is because of the amount of shimmers that are in here. And I love Juvia's Place's shimmer formula so much. Like, they have one of my favorite shimmers, and even though the mattes in this palette don't really do it for me, like they're a little bit too on the neutral side, I can definitely make some of them work. But honestly, this green right here, like that green on its own is like one of the reasons why I'm keeping this palette for, because I love this. I also love all of these other shimmers, like this light pink up here, stunning. This kind of greeny gold, absolutely beautiful. And I also really like these two mattes. I know they look kind of similar, but like one is a blue and one is a purple. And also this shadow right here is like a duochrome, like purpley blue topper. It's so beautiful. I really felt like I needed to put this palette in here. This was one of the palettes that I kind of was like taken in and out because I wasn't sure about it, but every time I took it out again, I was like, you know what, like I need to just keep this, because every time I'm second guessing myself, I keep reaching for this palette again and again. So I knew I needed to have this in my collection. Now, the next palette is a palette that I don't know if I would like need to have this, because I do have a lot of these shades in other palettes that I've already kept, but this is also one of those like special palettes to me, and this is the Polina palette by Blush Tribe. Polina is a friend of mine on YouTube. If you have not already checked out her channel, I will have her link down below, but she did a collaboration with Blush Tribe and she curated this palette, and this is just so her. And the fact that I was able to buy this and support her, and on top of that, this just being a perfect palette, like I have no complaints with any of the shadows in this. I think this performs so well. I love the color story in this. This green up here is fantastic, and also these two other greens, so nice. I love this, and I also love the shimmer formula in this palette. And this is a palette that would just pair so well with basically every other palette that I have chosen so far. So this would be like the perfect companion palette to anything, in my opinion, because I love these kind of colors. So for that reason, like I just thought that I would end up getting a lot of use out of this if I did keep it, and I'm like 100% sure that I would, because I love this palette. Now the last palette, this was a surprise for me, because I did not think that I would end up keeping this, but somehow the Alien palette by Jeffree Star snuck into my pile here, and I will show you why. because I've said in the past that I don't love this palette because some of the shimmers in this really hurt my eyes. But when I say hurt my eyes, I don't mean in like a, oh my god, my eyes are gonna fall out kind of way. It's more just like a little bit of like a burning sensation when you put the shadow on. And then sometimes my eyes will start watering when that happens. But like it goes away. It's just like really annoying, you know? Like if I don't have to deal with that, I don't want to have to deal with that. But I just think that this palette is so beautiful and it has so many unique shadows in it, and it also has the best purple that I have in my collection. I'm pretty sure I still think this is my best purple. And just the fact that I knew I needed to have like a good purple, because not all purples are, you know, as good. So I just knew I wanted to have a very good purple and a very good black, and this is also one of the best blacks in my collection. So these two colors right here was the main reason why I decided to keep this palette, because these are shades that I knew I would use a lot. And also the rest of these shades in this palette just perform beautifully. Like I really enjoy this palette. I really like these like goldy green shimmers. I just think that they're so beautiful. This shadow right here is stunning as well, and this mustardy kind of yellow shade, so pretty. Probe, absolutely amazing. I love this palette. Like this again is more like a companion palette to me, and I feel like this is a palette that would just pair so well with basically everything else that I've kept. So as you can see, I didn't keep a lot of browns or anything like that, except for the ones that were in the Natasha Denona palette. But that's all I would need because I don't really ever use browns. So just having a little bit of them like scattered in between the palettes and then kind of picking out the shadows that I knew I would use the most, I feel like I had a pretty good variety in like what I chose, and that I have all my bases covered, and that I have a matte in every color and I have a shimmer in basically every color. So I feel very content with my list, and I think that I made pretty good choices. Now, am I going to regret this? Like if I were to have to burn the rest of my collection like right now, would I be happy? No. Like there are so many palettes that I would miss so much and I would run out and buy again because I wouldn't want to live without them, but they also just, they weren't special enough for me or functional enough. Is that how you would say that? Utilitarian? Is that the word? I don't know. But you know what I mean? Like they're just like not a necessity enough that a lot of the other palettes in my collection were. So that's just kind of where I ended up. I would love to see you guys do this, especially if you have like quite a big collection. Even if you don't have a channel and you have like quite a big collection, like just sit down and think about the palettes that you would keep and why, because it was very interesting for me just kind of laying out all the palettes in front of me and just like going through them in my head and like sorting through and figuring out like why I wanted to keep some over others. It was a very interesting experience. So like I said, I would love to see you guys do this, and if you do, please tag me on Instagram and tell me about it, or like leave me a link down in the comments so I can watch your video. I would love to. So that's gonna be it for today's video. Let me know if you want to see me do like anything similar with like other things in my collection. I'm thinking I want to do it with like my single eyeshadows. Like if I could only keep like 10 single eyeshadows, that would be so hard, but I think I want to do it with that as well as lip products. So yeah, keep an eye out for that because I do plan on filming that. So I hope you like this video. If you want to see some other chatty videos that I have, you can click on this one or maybe this one. And if you're new to my channel, I would love it if you would consider subscribing, and I will see you in my next one. Bye.